And welcome to the Concealed Carry Podcast, part of the concealedcarry.com network. I am your host, Jacob Paulson, and I am not joined by my co-host, Riley Bowman, today. We gave him the boot in order to open up a seat to a much more interesting conversational partner. So we're going to introduce our guest here in a moment. Today is June 11th, 2025, as the recording of this episode, and we're really excited. This is going to be a very unique episode for the Concealed Carry podcast. We are broadcasting live on Facebook and on YouTube, and so we're hoping to get a couple of people chiming in with us as we go here. I just got the notification on my phone, so that's a good sign. And it's going to be fun. Our episode title today, Fiction That Trains You, Firearms, First Aid, and the Mindset of a Protector. This is an interesting episode we're going to have with this author, John Gilstrap. You can see here on the screen with me. Hey, John, how's it going?
Everything is well. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. This is going to be a fun chat. Now, before we get into the meat and bones here, a quick sponsor message from HK. In fact, we're going to be talking about some HKs, me and John today, among other things. So I'm just really excited about this. But HK, we're just really grateful to them to be a title sponsor of the Concealed Carry podcast. They've been doing a lot of cool stuff here lately. Not only have they opened up an entire manufacturing operation here in the U.S. out there in Georgia, but they've designed and now released a U.S. manufactured pistol, which is the HK-CC9, which I am carrying right now. The new VP9A1 series guns are also looking great, really enjoying those. And they have some other cool stuff coming probably later this year. So you should be paying attention to HK USA and what they're doing. So anyway, it's going to be a great time. If you are with us live here today, please drop in a note in the chat and introduce yourself and tell us where you're chiming in from. All right, John, I'll interrupt us later for another little sponsor message down the road, but I want to go ahead and get into the meat and bones here. And so this is that moment where you probably got this little speech memorized. Well, give us the rundown. Who's John Gilstrap? What's your backstory here?
Well, I'm here primarily, I guess, because I'm a New York Times bestselling author, and I've got about 30 books out. My background is, other than a writer, back in the day, I was a firefighter. I was a safety engineer. My specific background, dealt with explosives and hazardous materials and weapon systems. And I had no idea back in those days that I was training to be a thriller writer, but it's all of that stuff gets to play into my books. My primary character now for about 17 books is Jonathan Grave, who's a freelance hostage rescue specialist. And it is exactly what that sounds like. He's a former Delta operator who does, if you want your loved one back and you don't really care a whole lot what happens to the bad guys, that's you call out Jonathan Grave. And I just started a new series, actually, Burned Bridges. You can see it over my shoulder. Is a new feature starring Irene Rivers, who was the FBI director through all of the Grave books. So that's what I do. I write books.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I'll just tell this quick backstory of how me and John got connected, because if you have a podcast that's, I presume, even semi-successful, you have to subject yourself to receiving a massive volume of emails from publicists. This is just the nature of the beast. In fact, for those who don't know, if you have a podcast, you have to put a public email address in the feed of that podcast. So anybody can, so, you don't want to put your personal email address, but anybody can you have to put a email address and anybody can find it. So I get a lot of emails from people who are saying I should have this guest or that guest on the show. And most of them are ridiculous. I mean, to the point you're like, man, did AI write this? This is a joke. Like, oh, this guy is a chemical expert and is here to talk about, the emerging world of thermoplastics. It's like, what? Like, why are you contacting me? Do you even know what we talk about here? It's about guns. But anyway, I got, probably the only one I've never deleted. John, I assume it was like a publicist or a PR person reached out to me. Yeah. And this was in January. And I wasn't convinced. So at first I didn't delete the email, but I was like, this John Gilstrap guy sounds it. Based on her description, this would actually be somebody who would make sense to have on our show. So I took some time and went and actually read your books. And I was probably a good solid 10 books into the Jonathan Grave series before I finally returned an email back to that person, that publicist, whoever it was, and said, you know what, I'm down. I want to have John on. And it's because of your writing, what's so specifically unique about your writing that I think matters to this conversation. Because if it's like, hey, some guy writes some good thrillers, Like there's tons of people who write thrillers, but what you're writing, I find extraordinarily unique as it applies to my audience. And I think that I'm going to kind of jump into it a little bit with that right now, because I'll give you a couple examples and then I'm going to pose a question. But like a couple books ago, I don't know how many books these I've read now, like 17 or something, I guess, because you said there's
God
17.
bless you.
Yeah, a lot.
That's some serious vetting right there.
Yeah, Audible. I hope they're sending you checks because I'm giving them money. So, um, like a couple books ago, we're introduced to a protagonist, a bad guy, who got kicked out of the army because as a colonel, he had a negligent discharge with a Beretta, DASA, style Beretta, probably a Beretta 92 or something, I can't remember. And he left it in single action mode, failed to run the decocker, and then the course of reholstering put a round through his leg. Now, John, I don't expect you to remember all the details of every book you write, but that's the kind of thing that's very nuanced to gun handling for a fiction author to put into a book. And so I guess where I'm going to go with the question is, why is it so important to you to be accurate with firearms in a world where all of us know that Hollywood screws it up constantly? Fiction books don't seem to care. Nonfiction books struggle to get it right. Like, why is it so important to you to get the gun stuff, the explosive stuff? Like, why put the time and energy into not just getting it right, but actually including the details?
Well, I think some of it is my inner OCD, or as my son says, CDO in alphabetical order, as it should be. If the details aren't right, then the story can't be right. There's a trickle effect to these things, and firearms do play an important part in my books. They get people in trouble and they get people out of trouble. It's important to me because my name is on the spine, and I want to be the guy that does get it right. And I'm also that guy that gets kind of fumingly angry when I read somebody else's stuff, or I watch, on television or movies or whatever else, and you watch, it's not the esoteric stuff that they get wrong, it's the easy stuff that they get wrong. Grip and draw strokes and entry technique and choosing the right freaking gun. Those are the things that bother me when I see the mistake. So it's important for me to get it right. It's also important for me to get it right because I say things like I just said. So I get way out over my skis, and I know I don't know all of my fans, obviously, but I kind of have an idea who my fan base is. And if I get a detail wrong, and it happens, rarely, but it does, I will hear from them, and they will get a genuine apology from me because it's my job. I don't have a lot to do. I make stuff up, right? So it's it's my job to get the details right. Now, that particular incident, I got to tell you, where the guy shot himself, is a real story. It's not a military story. A buddy of mine, way back in my fire department days, he was on the SWAT team for the county. He was working. It was during a competition. It was a SWAT team competition, and in front of all of the other SWAT teams of the greater Washington metropolitan area, he shot himself in the calf while he was reholstering his gun. So
yeah.
And it's such a forgiving group of people, Yeah,
I bet. Yeah, it's just your career on the line. It's no big deal.
Yeah.
But I mean, we like this is a great example of kind of this underpinning that I think drew me to want to have this conversation, because I feel like your books are chock full of those little tiny, I'll call them like nuggets that it may not be your intention. Maybe the way you write the book, or when you're writing the book, maybe this doesn't even cross your mind. But what I see is the reader is like, man, like a gun owner could learn a lot about safe gun handling and guns and operating guns from reading these books. I'll give you another example. I don't know how many books ago, maybe 4 or 5 books ago, in the Jonathan Grave world, we have another bad guy who's, he's in some backroom shop getting a new identity by someone who does this for a living, and decides he has to shoot the person who's doing the job, and the victim draws a gun on the bad guy, and the bad guy grabs the gun and holds it such that as the first shot is fired, he induces a malfunction by preventing the slide from cycling. And then, he basically takes that gun out of action and is able to draw and deploy his own gun. So that's the kind of thing where it's like, hey, as an average gun owner, I just don't know if the average person would like, I'm hoping the average person would be like, oh, right, like that makes sense that when, like, if the slide can't cycle, that gun is a brick.
Well, exactly. And
I guess there's not a question there, but yeah.
No, and those are the details that matter. And in my books, even the good guys and the bad guys are very talented at what they do. And when you operate at that high a level, accidents shouldn't happen, right? So you put in the cool calculating moves in part because they're cool and calculating, and people like to read that stuff. But it is the little details that I think make and break a story. I think it makes a difference. I've had this discussion with other thriller writers who, if this is the entertainment business, and not everybody in the entertainment business is a pro-gun kind of person. So, if you've got your cop going in with his, and you're in the cop's point of view, he's going in with his gun drawn. Well, fine. That's not how the cop is thinking. First, the cop is going to be very aware of what that weapon is, simply because if it's this one versus that one, it operates differently, right? So, again, it comes down to what's the OCD, what's important to me. And what's important to me is to get it right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, contrasting, I'm thinking about a book. I probably shouldn't name names, but this is a very successful book. It's a Amazon Prime series. And an author who's maybe less enthusiastic about that kind of an element. And I'll never forget, there's the second or third book into the series. I'll never forget when these supposed bad guys, who happen to also be cops, as it were, but I'll never forget when the author used the verbiage that in one swift move they drew the Glock and disengaged its safety.
Yeah.
Right. And I just remember like almost throwing the book across, like, what are you talking about? And it's a very frustrating thing. And not only would that drive some hate mail, but I imagine you lose this little bit of confidence. Like, okay, well, if you got that wrong, what else did you get wrong? And it is the entertainment industry, but we crave that sense of realism.
Well, the sense of realism is what what fiction is all about, right? I mean, when you're reading a good book, how do you define a good book? There's this kind of a movie that unravels in your brain, and the little details like that eject you out of the story. The author's not done his job, and safeties on Glocks have been a problem in many books. I will forgive the safety versus decocker on a Beretta because it's kind of esoteric, but there are safeties on Glocks. They not something that
you don't manually disengage them.
Yeah, exactly.
And as you draw the gun. Yeah. One more thought on this topic of getting this thing right. I sometimes wonder, as I'm reading your books, I wonder if if there's a balance, like if you're worried about putting off people with too much gun stuff or too much gun nuanced detail. If you're like, man, there's some potential consumer group that's going to be like, oh my gosh, like here we go again on this thing.
Well, you've read enough of my books, and maybe you have noticed this. I call it the loadout paragraph. There will be some place where we will see that Jonathan is carrying M27 and his Colt 1911, and he likes to have the MP7 on his left hip. And then we got Boxer's his friend. He is an HK 417 guy, and I go through all of that in 2 or 3 paragraphs, fully aware that probably 95% of the readers, including my wife, just kind of gloss over that. That's the scene they skip. But it's also the very important scene for a lot of other readers like me. That's when
the 10%
actually helps me figure out what it is that they have in mind and what their capabilities are.
Yeah, it assembles the movie, like you said. For me, as I'm listening, it's like, it's funny you mentioned that, because you could probably, and maybe you even do, for all I know, and it doesn't matter to me if you do, but you could almost copy and paste those paragraphs into each book, and sometimes more than once in each book. It's
I
it's the
don't,
same.
but you're right. I
Well, they
could.
make there's some nuance. They tweak it. You don't, but they and there's some tweaks too. So it wouldn't always work out because in this particular instance, we're switched to this gun or whatever for whatever mission specific reason. But it's interesting to hear your kind of the way you perceive that because part of me says as an author you just write to who you want to write to. Like, well, hey, this is who my audience is, and if you don't want to be in that audience, that's fine. And the other part of me, as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, says, well, we kind of want to, reach the largest group of, of consumers as we can too.
It's a book is a product, a movie is a product, a holster is a product. The idea is to develop a brand. That would be me,
Mm-hmm.
and you count on there's a reliability. There's a sameness that is different, right? So it's like the comfortable shoes. A buddy of mine, Jeffrey Deaver, another writer, he in his kind of dinner time talk, refers to liver flavored toothpaste. It could be the best toothpaste on the planet is on the market. It just tastes like liver. Nobody's going to buy liver flavored toothpaste. So when you're writing a thriller, which is what I write, they have to thrill, and I have to know my sleeve. It's Brad Taylor and Brad Thor. They have their sleeve of they're brilliant writers, by the way. They have their sleeve, pretty much the Middle Eastern, the Islamic terrorist sleeve is theirs, along with others. I've chosen to take on more the cartels and other groups because it's different and that's my slice, right? So I'm not sure if I've answered your question or not, but the idea, my job is to provide entertainment for people that they can count on. It's going to be exciting. You're going to get an emotional ride. It'll be satisfying ride. It's not necessarily happy endings, but always, I hope satisfying endings. And that's what they can count on.
Well, I think I appreciate your comments about kind of building a brand and also kind of picking your I don't know if wheelhouse is the right word. You said sleeve. Maybe that's a fancy writer's term, but like, and it's actually interesting. I was going to ask this question, and you kind of answered already, but I was curious why we were like your theater of operation for Jonathan Grave is almost always we're going south. We're going to Mexico, and it works out well, frankly, for his character because his character is a former Delta operator, and so based on his age and kind of timeline, when he would have been active in the service, he would have been playing around in South America quite a bit. So it plays well already. But anyway, that was hearing you now discuss like, well, no one else is talking about this, and so this is a fun thing to do that can be uniquely mine. I appreciate that context.
And the bad guys can be really bad down.
I want to talk about some guns.
Okay, that's it.
We're not lacking bad guys in South America. I want to talk about some of the specific guns. So you just kind of nailed it down a second ago, but our main protagonist, Jonathan Grave, he's pretty darn consistent. He's got a Colt 1911 on the hip. He's running a kind of a traditional M4 carbine and then a HK MP7, I think, on his left hip. To your point, so I would love to hear like why these guns. At some point, however many years ago, you decided this was going to be his loadout for book one, and it's been pretty consistent. And you mentioned, of course, boxers. He's kind of the right hand guy. He loves that HK417, chambered in 7.62 NATO. It's a bigger gun. He's a bigger guy. But I'd love to hear like how did we choose the guns? What did that look like? Is it, hey, these are guns that Jonathan likes, or is it more these, put some research into the mission?
It's the gun that I spent a lot of range time with. I was, probably 15 years ago, I went down to Virginia Beach at the Navy SEAL compound down there, and I shot at their range for a while. And I went through the whole range of HKs. And I learned the mechanics and I learned the gun, and it fit everything that I needed it to do. And so I'm lazy. So once I have the research down, why not use the high end? And Jonathan Grave is a wealthy guy. He can use whatever firearms he wants. And HK is kind of leading edge. He doesn't need a lot of technical stuff, but he wants weapons that work well. And HK has been very nice to me. They've been my sponsors, the wrong word, but they've been my vector into the SHOT Show for many years. I go as media, and so they've been good to me, and I really like their firearms. It's really not a complicated answer, but that's where it comes from. Nobody in any of my books has ever shot a gun that I have not shot.
Oh, okay. Now we hit on something that's really golden, and I think that this is kind of that integrity aspect of being the author, right? Like, hey, I'm trying. Like, I'm not just pulling something out of a hat. I didn't Google it and say, oh, here's a gun someone's heard of, right? Like, I've shot this gun. I understand elements and aspects related to this gun. I think that's highly relevant. So, what I'd like to hear, and maybe this is the way I'll frame the question, is like, what is the burden placed on you in order to be able to be accurate in this category? Like, what do you have to do in order to ensure you can deliver on the gun stuff? You mentioned going to SHOT Show, but I mean, there's a certain burden, relative to that research.
The burden is all on me to get it right. And here's an example. 8 years ago, maybe, I was invited to go down to Quantico in Virginia to attend the Joint Captured Materiel Exploitation Command shoot. So they had PKs and AK-47s. First time I had shot a bad guy AK-47, as opposed to the tricked out AK-47s that you can get around here. And there is a feel, there's a noise. I found out there's a thing called the Kalashnikov clack that I had never actually heard of before. But there's a unique sound and feel to firing an HK-47 that I would never know if I hadn't tried it. So now it's not so much the burden of finding that out, but now it's having a detail that will really resonate in the book. I just found out from a buddy of mine yesterday, 2 days ago. He was firing suppressed rifle at great range, and it's hot out now, and he's firing hot rounds, and the mirage, the heat mirage, made it difficult for him to see his target at 200 yards or 250 yards, whatever he's shooting. And I had never heard that before. I never witnessed it before, and I thought, okay, there's a detail for a book, right? Because it's something that it's real and people haven't thought of, and it adds to the entertainment value.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's these elements, that I just perceive that one of the greater burdens is that research element. When I'm listening, so, books always have to take place somewhere. So even something as simple as like our back scene. Jonathan Grave lives in a small town in Virginia, right?
Fisherman's Cove.
And Fisherman's Cove, Virginia. And so sometimes these are places that are on the other side of the country to me, not places I'm familiar with. I don't really, I'm not going to pause the book and Google it and see if these places exist. But on occasion, a book will, take me somewhere that I am familiar with, where it's like, hey, no, that's a place I know, and it sounds like exactly what I believe to be true. So beyond, these gun details, it seems like there's a pretty significant burden, just relatively, broadly speaking, I guess, to research and accuracy. Like, speak to that really quickly, John. Like, what does that look like, and how big of a deal is it?
It's as big a deal. How do I put this? I try to set places in unreal. I try to set stories in unreal places that you think are real. For example, there's a Braddock County in Northern Virginia. It's in my books. It doesn't really exist, but people who live in Northern Virginia will recognize exactly where this is. But it takes the burden away from me. First of all, I can have really corrupt politicians and not have to deal with that. There was a book. I think it was called Final Target. Was the book where there's a final chase scene and shootout that happens along the Gulf of America, the Yucatan Peninsula. And I didn't want to go there for a number of reasons to do the research. So I picked the place, and then I went to Google Maps. And Google Maps allows you to drive, the street view allows you to drive the entire route. I mean, street corners, what's on the street corners and all of that, you can do all of that. And so to me, that's the research. The rest of it, I have been to that part of the world. Frankly, a jungle is a jungle to me. And you pull away from the stuff you're not sure of, kind of give the feeling of knowledge, and then the stuff you are sure of, you drill in and get very real. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. It makes sense because it's ultimately entertainment. But I think that, I guess that there's as a reader, sometimes I think subconsciously we extract beliefs and tenets from things, even though we believe them to be, or we know practically that they're fiction, right? So, I could perceive a belief about things related to jungles from having read your books, where several of them, there's runnings arounds in jungles, and even if I've never been into a jungle, it creates this vision of what a jungle is like, and I see that also as a benefit with the gun handling. I'm thinking about my audience, the concealed carrier of America, where if you never considered certain nuances to gun handling, like, you're going to get them here. Like things as simple as when the character is transitioning from rifle to a handgun, and why, right? Like things like that seem really poignant, or opportunities for potential lessons. Are there specific things that, well, how do I word this, John? I'm wondering if there are specific events or lessons you're trying to convey when you write some of those things. If you mentioned that for example, that negligent discharge was a real life thing that happened to somebody, that you're aware of that incident having taken place, and so you're like, hey, let's cook that in here. Obviously, there's an entertainment value, but there's also like a lesson to be taught. Like, hey, don't let this happen to you. Are there other examples of that kind of thing where you've done that?
Yeah, I think not lessons in the sense of lessons of morality, that kind of thing, but lessons on how things are done. About a few years ago, I was a bad guy with the FDLE, Florida Department of Law Enforcement SWAT team. There was an abandoned school somewhere in Tallahassee, and I was part of the bad guy team who was taking hostages, and they were the good guy team. And this was in simunitions, live fire stuff. And there are elements of how there's an organicness to the way teams move, how they stack up, how they communicate with each other, that is, I think, really cool. And it's what makes them efficient. There's also a unique terror to be the bad guy, getting actually shot at by these people and shooting back at them. There was at one point I actually stopped, I didn't stop it, but in between these scenarios, they knew who I was, and I'm just an author on a research trip. And I walked through a couple of specific scenarios where I said, okay, so I'm the bad guy. He's my good guy. And I've got him hold like that. What do you do? How do you actually counter that? They would walk it through for me in slow motion. Well, you do this. And when this happens, the bad guy has to make choose from two choices, both of which are bad. And okay, so there's a psychological element to all of this, and I think it's about getting into the space of the people who do these entries. How do you pie the corner, to clear a room, and just how tense that is, and what are the considerations. Jonathan he works in a team of 2, or 3, which is a whole different thing than a team of 23, right? If you're going to go in and get Osama bin Laden. So it's a matter of understanding these things and bringing them to life on the page in a way that is accurate, and frankly pays tribute to the folks who took the time out of their day to help me learn this stuff.
Yeah, and I think I keep looking off screen in case people are wondering. I have notes, and so I'm looking at my notes so I don't forget important topics. But I I I feel this intention from you to try and honor our public servants,
Yes.
law enforcement, military, first responder. You yourself, we already mentioned in your bio, you were a first responder, so some of those things make sense. But there's also this other element to this, in addition to just I think this like respect that you're trying to demonstrate. There's also this element that in order to write the book, you have to go talk to these people. You actually have to understand, what these different units and divisions are in the army, and who are these guys that get trained to fly helicopters over here, and why or might they have different skill set than the helicopter pilots over here in the Navy or whatever the thing is. So I guess I want to give you an opportunity to express like what does that part of your world look like, interfacing with these public servants, and how does that what is the important element in your writing that comes from that?
Well, I wrote a nonfiction book in 2006 called 6 Minutes to Freedom, soon to be a Netflix picture. Um,
Ah,
the and that was a very successful Delta Force operation to rescue Kurt Muse from a prison in Panama. And that group, that Delta Force team, was the first that actually worked with me and talked to me about what they did and how they did it. Um, and the one, my one thing was that I wouldn't reveal any. I was down at their compound too, that I would never reveal any of that stuff, and that I would never show that I would show respect for the effort that has been made, which doesn't mean sucking up. That means that these folks are amazing people. They're not. I wrote in the book that they're gentlemen and gentlemen who are capable of extreme violence, and in the telling of that story, one of the things that was very important to them, they didn't have to get them to review the book or anything like that. They all got copies. But during the research phase, the thing I heard more than anything else was they wanted me to emphasize the lives they didn't take. The ones who were zip tied at the bottom of the stairs because they put their weapons down and didn't fight back. Yeah, there were people who chose poorly in that, and it didn't end well for them. So they're real human beings, whether it's on the police side or on the military side. They're real human beings who are capable of extraordinary violence, but without raising, not literally, but not raising the heartbeat, never losing focus on what the mission is. They're not acting out of anger. They're acting out of efficiency of accomplishing the mission. And I think often actually, that gets lost in the whole snake eating kind of thing, or portraying these folks as kind of this side of crazy. I have never encountered those, whether it's FBI hostage rescue team guys, or if it's Delta guys or SEALs, or I know folks from all of these corners. I find them all to be delightful folks, and they take my phone calls, I think, in part because they're friends, and what they do is a really honorable mission, and they do it more than anybody realizes. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that happens that just doesn't make the news.
thank you for sharing that. I think it's interesting because from an outsider's perspective, even in my much younger days, you kind of perceive these special operators to effectively be like crazed cowboys. But the more you meet these kinds of people, the more my perception changes that they are all gentlemen warriors, right? They're just good, down to earth humans with legitimate moral compass who just have a job to do, and they're capable of flipping a switch and doing the job. So I think that comes through in your writing really well. And so if any of those first responders, whether it's military or law enforcement, are listening, I think you honor them well in what they do.
Thank you.
Let's transition a little bit and talk about morality. You create opportunities in the narrative of your stories to discuss the morality of what your protagonist is doing. Jonathan Grave, as we mentioned, in fact, when you and I spoke on the phone a couple weeks ago, the word you used, and I'll never forget, is you said, he's a murderer. The guy's a murderer. And in every legal sense, it's true. The man is a murderer. Like he definitely just, he's not getting warrants. He's not always, worried about what the courts are going to say and whether or not he checked the boxes of self-defense. He's more in the realm of like, I'm just on the side of the angels. I perceive and I believe I'm following a moral compass. And so it is what it is kind of thing. I just do what needs to be done. But in the story, there's moments where you have characters who question his decisions or have a slightly different moral compass. And so I want to talk about that a little bit. Like you dedicate some pages to the discussion. So it's not an ancillary, like the way I perceive it is not, well, the author here feels like he has to address this. And so he addressed it. Now we're moving on. I feel like the author is trying to make a point here. Like he's trying to communicate some important thing he wants readers to understand. Like what's the foundation of what you're trying to communicate when you have those conversations?
The justice prevails. That's in Jonathan Graves' world, and in this what world that I have created in which he lives. People who oppress others. Now I'm sounding like Stalin. People who oppress others, who they're just the bullies. They kidnap. They do whatever bad things they do. They're bringing pain to people who haven't earned it. And you use the phrase, Jonathan considered himself to be on the side of the angels. So when you hire him, or hire is probably not always the right word, he's going to bring justice to the bad guys, and he's going to reunite the good guys with their families. And he believes, and I may or may not agree with this, the justice moves very slowly. In fact, I was kind of surprised. One of my friends with the FBI HRT referred to hostage taking as a homicide in slow motion. And in discussing this further, obviously they are committed to saving the hostage. But there's kind of a quiet anticipation that might not happen. The disaster for a law enforcement agency, and when there's a hostage taking, is if the bad guy gets away, especially if the bad guy isn't convicted on some kind of a technicality. The warrant wasn't dated properly. They didn't get a warrant at all, or they should, those kinds of things. I mean, we have a constitution, and I agree that we all need to be protected by that. But that slows things down sometimes. Even the command and control stuff, we're waiting for permission to move ahead. Uvalde, Texas, the ultimate horrible extension of that. It slows things down, and the people who pay the price are the victims. In Jonathan's world, to hell with all that. There's the good guy, there's the bad guy. Let's get the good guy and not worry about the rest of the stuff. Now there's stuff in his background. It's kind of complicated, but Jonathan, it would be like his fingerprints are not on record for various reasons and all that. So he's hard to catch in what he does, but everything he does is extra legal. And frankly, everything he touches, he ruins a lot of evidence. When people couldn't possibly use the stuff that he has collected while pursuing the bad guys, because it's all tainted. None of it would be admissible in court. So he's almost, while he's bringing justice to the bad guys, he's also really frustrating law enforcement agencies who are now feel sort of hamstrung. So that's kind of his world. But Jonathan is first and foremost about justice, and that's what weighs on him the most. Is that I've made a commitment. I want to honor the commitment, and those hostages, or whoever the good guys are, deserve better.
Yeah. Man, the first response, like when you first started to answer the question, you said the thing that I found most valuable, which is this. I think the underpinning belief is this feeling of like, even though this is a fictional story, and there may not be some ultra wealthy vigilante former Delta dude coming for you. Um, Justice does ultimately get served. Like it is real and it is coming. And the good guys are going to win. The bad guys are going to fail. And I think that's that's important.
And the
Even if
work, when I
sometimes,
think one of the most challenging parts and frankly exciting parts of stories like this is the person who's, and this is whether it's in real life or in fiction, the person who is 30 seconds away from being rescued has no idea that this is not his status in life for the next 20 years, right? They don't know what is coming for them, the good news that is coming for them. And just think about it, I kind of got a chill thinking that. Think of the drama and the privilege of being one of those rescuers. With Kurt Muse, then they broke into his cell and spoiler, he got out. The first thing they said was, they called him Moose because he's a big guy. Said, "Moose, you're going home." And in talking to Kurt, the has a hard time getting through that phrase. You're going home, because he thought he was going to spend the rest of his life in this skanky jail in Panama. It's the drama of it is stunning, and the honor to be the person who does that is stunning.
yeah, that's it's an additional nod, I think, to those people who have careers dedicated to bringing justice to bad guys. So I think that's an important underlining. Another direction here of questioning that I wanted to make sure we fit in here is this. I'll call it part of the political discourse that comes through the pages. Now, because you create a world, you get to do whatever you want with it. I think you've had the same U.S. president since like 2009 in your books, so it's it's all kind of good. You don't have to pick a specific real life person or party. In fact, I've not heard any mention of a party. You'll say things like, "Well, their party has done this to the country," but you haven't mentioned which party you're talking about. So you kind of get to provide some, I don't know if opinion is the right word, but some perspective without pointing fingers.
Okay.
And I'm curious to hear a little bit about how you approach that, and if there's specific things you're trying to communicate. Like as John, the author, like has XYZ concerns or perspective about America, and this is an outlet to maybe express those.
Well, as the author, I can't really separate myself from my characters, right? I mean, it all comes from the same imagination, which means I'm a bad guy too, right? I have to be in both points of view.
We all
I
are.
think that if you were to ask Jonathan, and I would agree with him that most politicians are gas bags, that they don't have any skin in any game that they play, then they make other people jump through hoops or not jump through hoops, not take the most obvious path for reasons that make sense for their own political careers as opposed to what's best for the situation, whether it's the country as a whole or for one individual in a certain circumstance. And I think that there's an overarching um, disgust from Jonathan about everybody who's a politician, and frankly, most people who are bureaucrats. He doesn't. People who just make a living getting in the way of other people, or especially given the stakes of the books, he has no time for. And I think we're in a position now in the country. I mean, this is John, not Jonathan, me. Um, we've been put in a place where we're valuing all of the wrong things, and we're vilifying all of the things that we all is too extreme, but we're vilifying many of the things that we should be embracing. I mean, my God, we're taking down schools that are named after Abraham Lincoln. It's just, if it wasn't sad, it's just absurd. And people like Jonathan Grave, if they were real, they would set things straight. And I think that's why people like him. I think that's why my fans like him, because he's that guy who, no, that's not how this is going to go. It's going to go in the way of justice. I mean, you look at there's a gun broadcast, right? The broadcast. So let's talk about guns. Somehow the instrument, the pressure container that launches a pellet has become an evil thing for generations. It was the stuff that the item put food on the table, and it protected your family from bad guys or bad animals or whatever the case may be. It was not, and now suddenly this inanimate object has become vilified by various legal authorities. I live in West Virginia. We don't have that problem, but in many other parts of the world, it is a problem, and I don't understand it. There's almost a willing disregard for logic. Why do you need a gun to protect your house? Seriously? I mean, honestly, did you hear the words that just came out of your mouth? Why do we have to have these discussions? I'm on a rant. Sorry.
I mean, I was going to follow it up with let's talk about the Second Amendment specifically. I mean, Jonathan Grave as a character is sort of like this. I'll call it like a practical Batman, right? Super wealthy dude who goes out and just dishes out some justice.
Actually, there's always a Batman reference. Every book has a Batman reference.
Always, but it's a practical take. I mean, it doesn't feel fanciful. That's what's the word I'm looking for. It doesn't feel as much like a fantasy. It feels more practical. Yeah. Thank you. But regardless, I think it's a wonderful thing to be able to kind of communicate how you see these things through a character. You know, Jonathan is just as a character, he's mind blown that people don't all own guns and know how to use them. I mean, he just can't grasp it, right? The idea, at one point, he's kind of caught in an active shooting situation on a bridge, and he's just kind of like, I cannot believe I'm the only guy responding. Like, what is going? Like, none of these people are capable. They're just a bunch of sheep, you know. And so it's clear as a character that he, feels like those rights are God-given and that they're critical. And looking at our current situation as a country, it's it's getting dicey. I mean, it's just getting really dramatic around the gun question. And I'm in Colorado. You know, you mentioned you're in West Virginia. Here in Colorado, we got plenty of problems. I'm in the heat of the fight, frankly. So, right. I guess I'm I don't know how to word the follow-up question, but I'm trying to give you permission to keep going on what you were talking about, because I want to hear more about politics, broadly speaking, aside, but the gun question, and the Second Amendment question.
Here's an example, and I think it's certainly gun-related, and it's gun tangential. Anyway, until about 4 years ago, I lived in Virginia. I now live in West Virginia. In West Virginia, if you wake up and there's a guy, it doesn't even have to be a bad guy. If there's a stranger in your house, there is a presumption that he is there to do harm. And not only are you free to use appropriate force, which in your home, deadly force is always appropriate in those circumstances, you are immune from any civil prosecution that comes from that, whether you wound him and he has issues, or if his family wants to sue. That cannot happen in West Virginia. Now, 30 miles from here, across the border in Virginia, you can't clear your own house. If you hear a burglar, you sleep on the second floor, and you hear a burglar on the first floor, you have to call the police. You are not allowed to go and chase down the burglar on the first floor. So this is the madness of politicians getting involved in. There's nothing more basic than a parent's duty to protect his family or her family, right? I mean, there's nothing more basic than that. yet now getting politicians that are involved with this. But before you can do that, you have to go and you have to take it out of the safe where it's unlocked, and then you have to go to the other safe to get the ammo, and then you have to load the magazine, and then you have to. It's madness, and I don't know why people don't see it as madness. I don't know where are the other voices, where are the other people who have platforms, like I have a platform, like this, and you obviously do. Why aren't the people saying this isn't political? This is so plainly obvious. Castle doctrine. I don't think there can possibly be anything more plainly obvious than castle doctrine because of my freaking castle, right? you don't belong in my house, and I shouldn't have to interview you at 2 a.m. in my underwear before I decide whether or not you belong there. It's just not. I don't understand why we even have the argument.
Yeah, yeah. When my son, who's going to graduate from high school this coming year, when he was about 4 or 5 and starting to understand what his dad did for a living, I'll never forget the conversation where he said, "Well, Dad, I'm okay with guns, but I think they should only be for defense, not for offense." And I was like, "Yep, bingo, you got it. High five!" Like my 5-year-old gets it, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't understand. Like it's hard to reconcile how we landed where we are sometimes. But I appreciate that you have a medium that allows you to, even if it's a fictional entertainment world, to communicate, some of those ideas, those concepts. And the reader can choose to say, I don't agree with that character. The reader can say, preach it. And that's fine, right? That's how that works. I would love to hear.
Good.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say along those lines.
I was going to say, I would love to hear the response. Like, I'll let you transition from your thought into my next question, which is, what's the response you get from readers? Positive, negative. I'd like to hear like the feedback that comes from those over, messages, those overt messages that come through.
On the political side, where the Tony Darmond administration has been in place since 2007, actually. And
oh, jeez.
It's so, and people read the books when they read the books. It's not necessarily the year when they come out. So I get angry email from people who assume equal parts from the left and the right, who assume that I am hammering their president. So I figure I'm hitting the sweet spot. If everybody's that confused, then I'm hitting the sweet spot. On the gun stuff, I actually don't get a lot of pushback because I don't think the anti-gun people really read my books. I mean, why would you do that? It would be an exercise in discomfort for 400 pages. So mostly I get a lot of very high praise. It's that what I do is entertainment. The one where I got some pushback from New York, which is where my publisher is in Burn Bridges, the book that just came out. There's a 12-year-old, Wyatt, who, spoiler a little bit, he kills a guy, a burglar in a house, with a well-done triple tap from a gun that is held in like one of those drop-down shelves that you have. And the police are horrified that this 12-year-old had these gun skills. And Irene Rivers, his aunt, she's a custodial. So not only does she train him in firearms, they've got like 170 acres in West Virginia. Not only they have a firing range, but she trains them to draw and shoot. Because if you're going to need it, you're going to need it. So it's not about, she's into the triple tap, former FBI, right? So I did get pushback from the folks in New York that was a really harsh thing to teach to a 12-year-old. And they said, well, he just saved his sister's life. That's kind of, it stayed in the book. Yeah. So if you're going to have it, you train with it. And if you're going to train with it, you train with it for the circumstance where you hope you never use it, because that's where muscle memory comes in. First responder. You train and you train and you train so that you do things. It's almost like the autonomic nervous system, right? You in my case, firefighter, you pull the hose line, carry it a certain way, you handle it a certain way, and the water comes a certain way, and then you deploy it a certain way, because it's going to be dark, it's going to be cold, all the things, but the muscle memory works. I've never had to shoot at somebody. I hope I never have to shoot at somebody, but I train for the moment that if I have to defend myself that way, it's a bad time to start training.
Yeah. Yeah. We're coming up on our time, but there's one other topic that's on my mind. We've been talking a lot about, you know, how you're communicating and what you're communicating in your writing. But one specific thing that's very important to me as a gun owner, that also is a clearly researched element of most of these books, is a medical response to trauma, and particularly massive hemorrhage. You're a former firefighter, so this is presumably squarely in your wheelhouse. But I would love for you to just, for my listeners and watchers of this podcast, how important, outside of the, hostage rescue, fictional world of Jonathan Grave, for the Jacobs and Johns of the world, how important is that medical preparedness, and what might be things you want to communicate in your writing relative to that?
Bleeding control. That's, if you only learn one thing. It's you probably can't hear it, but there's a chainsaw going on out there. Chainsaw injury. If you're going to die from it, you're going to have a serious problem with it. It's going to be because you're bleeding. So learning how to use a tourniquet, learning how to use quick clot, learning the fact that if anybody who dies of anything dies of shock ultimately. So I think everybody should learn the basics of controlling hemorrhage. Even if you're just stuffing a shirt or dirt into the wound, you can worry, somebody else worries about the infection, but you want to have somebody alive to take care of the infection. Pressure on the wound, and everything else follows from that. As long as you got a live patient, you got something you can do. But somebody bleeds out, that's it. So
Yeah,
that's my message.
Yeah, I love it. There's great elements in your books along these lines. You have kind of one of the protagonists who's also a former Delta guy who's got great medical skills, packs a lot of wounds. We hear a lot about quick clot. We hear a lot, I think in the last book or two, I heard a reference to Kaido gauze, which I'm also a big fan of.
There's actually one scene where there's a through and through. It's a kid where Jonathan's on one side and Boxer on the other, and their fingers touch as they're putting the quick clot for that gave me a chill when I wrote
it. Yeah, I remember picturing that, like, wait a minute, will that even work? Like, I had to stop and think, like, wait, is that? No, that's still what you should do, kind of thing. But I think that's great elements. There's a Navy corpsman that's a great character in one of the books as well. That's got some medical skills, and some of those topics kind of come through that. Anyway, I really appreciate that, and I think I forgot to mention it, but the other sponsor of this episode is Mountain Man Medical. So for anyone who's looking for a good IFAK with name brand TCCC recommended tested medical components, go check out mountainmanmedical.com for your affordable IFAK, and that'll be a good option. Guys, we're coming to the end of our time here. We've been talking with John Gilstrap, who's a New York Times bestselling author, despite the fact that his publisher on occasion questions his work, apparently, or at least on one occasion. And John, you've got a lot of different books and series of books and things. This is the time I'd love for you to share with the audience where they can learn more about you. If there's specific, kind of a call to action you want people to consider taking, if they're interested in learning more about your work.
The first place to start is johngilstrap.com. Everything will be there. Books are available wherever books are sold. Burn Bridges, first book in the Irene River series, just came out. Very proud of it. Again, that should be everywhere the books are sold. And if not, you can always go to Amazon or your local bookstore. I answer all of my emails. So if you read a book and you have a question or a comment or whatever the case may be, drop me a line, john@johngilstrap.com. And I'll be sure to get back with you. But it's been a real honor to be here, and I'd love to do it again.
Yeah, I think we should connect at SHOT Show in the HK booth. And
there you go.
Podcast episode in the HK booth. That's what I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I've done that before. They're very willing to accommodate that kind of thing. So that could be fun. So that way we could do it in person. To everyone who's listening, I really appreciate it if you consider at very least, noting John's website. Go like his socials, subscribe to his things, because he's given very generously of his time to be here with us today. He's a very busy man. Last time John and I spoke, he was on his way to a some sort of writers summit conference thing where you were
Writers
giving a
Conference.
keynote.
Yes.
Yeah, and I know that you know, having read some things on your website and followed some of your socials, that you're pretty involved as a mentor and a coach to other writers. That's an important thing to you. So I would encourage people to take advantage of those opportunities and to go check out John's work. I'm a big fan. I am really excited. I think I'm going to go back and read 6 Minutes of Freedom. I want to hear more about that story. I know where the title comes from because I heard it from Larry Vickers, but I'm really excited to go read that story. And then I'm going to go pick up Burn Bridges and start following Irene Rivers in her new chapter of life. So I'm very excited. John, once again, thank you for being here with us. Any last words?
It's my pleasure. Really a thrill to be here.
Well, there you have it, folks, from theconcealedcarry.com, from our guest John, and from myself today. A reminder to train right, train often, and train safe so you can fight hard, fight fast, and fight true. Take care, everyone.